Once you and your students have gotten started using Voces, you may want to take advantage of some of the features in the Class and Student Management portal. To get started, click on the Teachers panel, the yellow head in front of the globe, and then the desk icon for Class and Student Management. Here, you'll see all of your classes listed, of course with the option to add a new class as well. And clicking on the class name will give you some options that we'll cover in this video. The first, Add or View Students, will show you the student list for that class. We'll also show you the most recent activity for that student. Clicking on a student's name will give you an option to edit that student. This lets you change their first name, last name, or their user ID, as well as change what class that student is in. Here we'll see some options for automatic grading. We can adjust the automatic grading for each student by clicking on these boxes to change their automatic grading settings. By default, Voces will always look for spelling, punctuation, accents, and spaces. And as you can see, you can set accent checking, punctuation checking, or space checking off for specific students. You can also change this in account settings. We do have a more detailed video about that that you can watch as well. Once you've made any necessary changes, click Save, and you'll see those changes reflected. The next option is the usage log. The usage log will show us what pages the student visited, as well as the date and time that they entered the page and the date and time that they left the page. This is useful for troubleshooting any missing assignments or just any disagreements about any student activity. You can really easily see what they accessed and see if maybe they were logged in as a different student or, again, just troubleshooting any of those issues. The third option to delete the student, you can delete a student by clicking Delete and entering your user ID. Important to remember that your user ID is your unique password, so this is different than your class ID that you and your students use. So you want to make sure you're entering that user ID rather than the class ID. You also, of course, have options to add students either through the Quick Add or through the CSV option. And here at the top for the class, we have some additional options as well. We can get an ID cards printable page. So this will give me the class ID and user ID for each student. This is really easy to print and hand out if we are in class. We can also use the ID email list. This won't directly email your students. You would copy and paste this to each student and email it outside of Voces, but it's a little bit easier than copying and pasting from the student ID cards. That's also helpful if you need to look up a student's login. If they forget their login, you can access that really easily there. The next option is to save this class list as a CSV. This would download the student list with their first name, last name, and user ID just as a spreadsheet that you could use to upload somewhere else or just to keep track of student information. Next, we have the option to copy this class. Clicking Copy Class will give me a drop-down menu with all of the other titles that I currently have access to as a teacher. This allows me to copy these students to the next level, for example, of Nuestra Historia, which would then give them access to that next title, keeping their login information. So they will keep their same class ID and user ID, but now have access to Nuestra Historia 2, as well as Nuestra Historia 1. Once I've done that, if those students, for example, are moving on for next year, I can delete an entire class as well. Deleting the class, again, we'll want to make sure we have our user ID handy and we can delete the class easily. The final option for class and student management, of course, is to rename the class, so you'd be able to change the title of that class easily as well. These are some really good features that you may want to use that may come in handy as you troubleshoot any specific issues with your students as well. But of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us using any of the great options under the question mark icon in your account.